You know, when you think about how a huge global religion gets started, you probably imagine some big success story, right? Well, not always. Sometimes it starts with a massive failure. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. The totally surprising story of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
And just to give you a sense of scale here, we're talking about over 16.6 million baptized members worldwide. That's a huge number. This isn't some small group. It's a major global faith with schools, hospitals, you name it, all over the world. But how it all began? Well, that's one of the most unlikely stories you'll ever hear.
So that really is the big question, isn't it? How on earth does a movement not just survive, but actually thrive after its main founding prediction blows up in the most public way you can imagine? It seems impossible. To figure that out, we got to go all the way back to the beginning.
All right, so to really get the Adventists, we need to set the scene. Picture this. It's the early 1800s in America. And let me tell you, the air is just buzzing with this incredible religious energy. This whole era was called the Second Great Awakening, and it was basically a hotbed of religious revival. You had these huge camp meetings, preachers traveling all over the place, and for the first time, Bibles were pretty easy for anyone to get their hands on. This meant people felt like they could have this direct, personal connection to Scripture and prophecy. It was, the perfect soil for new religious ideas to just sprout up.
And right out of that spiritual fire came this powerful movement, and it was all focused on one single, electrifying idea, that Jesus Christ was coming back, and soon.
This movement was called Millerism, and the guy leading the charge was William Miller. He was a farmer, a Baptist preacher, and after just years and years of burying himself in the Bible, he became absolutely convinced he had cracked the code, He thought he'd unlocked a prophetic timeline. His whole interpretation of a passage in the book of Daniel led him to this one startling conclusion. The second coming was literally right around the corner.
And man, the anticipation just kept building and building. Miller starts preaching this back in 1831. His first predicted time frame, sometime between 1843 and 44, comes and goes. But did they give up? Nope. His followers just recalculated. And they zeroed in on one single specific day, October 22nd, 1844. By then, the movement was huge. We're talking over 100,000 people. They called this their blessed hope. I mean, people sold their farms. They closed up their shops. They literally put their whole lives on hold to gather and wait for what they believed was the single most important event in all of human history.
But that blessed hope was about to run headfirst into a pretty crushing reality. As all those thousands of believers looked up at the sky, the day finally came.
So, October 22nd arrived. The believers watched, and nothing happened. The sun set, midnight came and went, and then the sun rose on October 23rd on a world that was exactly the same. That day would go down in history with a name that says it all: the Great Disappointment.
I mean, listen to this quote from one of the believers, a man named Hiram Edson. You can just feel the devastation. This wasn't just, oops, we got the math wrong. This was a deeply personal, soul-crushing experience. For all intents and purposes, the movement was dead. Or was it?
So, in the aftermath, as you'd expect, most of the Millerites just gave up and went home. But a small, scattered handful of them, they just refused to believe it was all for nothing. They went right back to their Bibles, desperate to find an answer.
And this brought them to a major fork in the road. They had two options. Option one, the date was wrong. They just messed up the calculation. Or option two, and this was the radical idea, what if the date was right, but they had completely misunderstood the event? A small group started to think that maybe, just maybe, that second option was the answer.
And this is what led to a massive theological breakthrough. The very next morning, that same guy, Hiram Edson, had what he described as a vision. He suddenly understood that Jesus hadn't come to earth because that wasn't the plan. Instead, on that exact day, he had entered a new phase of his work up in a heavenly sanctuary. So the prophecy wasn't wrong. It just wasn't about the end of the world on earth. It was about the start of a final judgment in heaven. This completely reframed everything. It gave the 1844 date a whole new, profound meaning, and it became a cornerstone for what came next.
Okay, so this new heavenly sanctuary idea starts to bring some of those scattered Millerites back together. And right around the same time, another crucial piece of the puzzle falls into place. A woman named Rachel Oakes Preston, who was a Seventh-day Baptist, introduced them to the idea of observing the Sabbath on Saturday, the seventh day, not Sunday.
Leaders like Joseph Bates really latched onto this, and it became this powerful, unifying belief. It gave them a distinct identity and a real reason to start gathering again for what they called Sabbath conferences.
So now they've got it. They have a new way to understand 1844, and they have the Saturday Sabbath to rally around. But, a bunch of beliefs isn't a church. The next big step was to actually build an organization.
And out of the ashes of that disappointment, a few key leaders really stepped up to make that happen. You had this tireless organizer, and at his side, a really charismatic spiritual guide.
James White, he was the practical engine behind the whole thing. He knew they needed a way to communicate and get organized. So in 1849, he starts a little paper called The Present Truth. And get this, it eventually became the Adventist Review, which is still published today. He was absolutely the driving force behind getting the church formally organized, and he even served as its president a few times. And working right alongside him was his wife, Ellen G. White. Now, her role was different. Starting when she was just 17, she reported having thousands of visions from God. Her writings and her spiritual counsel gave guidance on, well, everything, from doctrine to health to education. She became a massive foundational influence on the new church. For Adventists, she wasn't just a talented writer, she was seen as a messenger, appointed by God.
So, with these leaders in place, they took the final steps. In 1860, they picked a name that perfectly captured their two core beliefs: Seventh Day for the Saturday Sabbath, and Adventist for their belief in the Second Coming. Then, just 3 years later, in 1863, the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists was officially organized. And just like that, a movement born from total disappointment was now a formal official church.
And that really brings us full circle. From that tiny, scattered group of heartbroken believers, the church started to grow, and then it just kept growing.
I mean, the growth was just explosive. Think about this, only 16,000 members in 1880. By 1960, that's over 1 million. And today, that 16.6 million we talked about at the beginning. The church that started in a little corner of New England blew up into a worldwide organization, really driven by its message of mission work and health. And what's really amazing is that the original hope that started everything is still central to who they are. Look at this. It's the theme for their big 2025 World Session, Jesus is Coming, I Will Go. That's a direct echo of that original Millerite hope, but it's been transformed, right? It's not about a specific date on a calendar anymore. It's about a continuous global mission.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's a pretty incredible story about the power of resilience and reinterpretation. The story of the Seventh-day Adventist shows us how a moment of what seemed like absolute total failure can be completely reframed into a foundational story of purpose. It created a message of hope that clearly continues to shape the lives of millions and millions of people all around the world today.